Getting your hands on the strongest weapons for the first time in any video game is one of the most satisfying experiences in a playthrough. The moment you equip that sword or that tome, looking at your stats rise, and then finally enter a battle with your beast of a weapon in hand, you feel sometimes just short of a god. Fire Emblem, a series loaded with swords, axes, lances, bows, spellbooks, and what have you, can elicit those same feelings. One moment you're struggling to take down a horde of enemies, the next you have a weapon so strong that you can just end turn and watch the red units vanish into nothingness as they rush to their demise without considering how good your unit has just become. The weapons in this list, though, aren't really those kinds of weapons. But today we are looking over the best weapons in each Fire Emblem game. These consider availability, utility, and practicality that go along with their stats, not just their raw numbers themselves. It should be noted that these aren't the strongest weapons in the game. That is literally a whole other topic that I want to get to eventually. What I find a more interesting discussion, though, is these weapons in particular. This is a disclaimer that I need to mention. This list is subjective. Someone may get more use out of what I wouldn't consider the best weapon in one game versus another, especially in games where there are multiple great options. I will be presenting my thoughts on why I think these weapons are the best, but that doesn't mean that they're the be-all end-all. I know already that people will find different weapons the best, so just don't be mean or condescending about it in the comments, as subjects like these can have the possibility of breeding hostility and elitist mindsets. There are more ways than one to play Fire Emblem. This video took a lot of research and consultation with different members of the Fire Emblem community who helped me greatly by having an informed opinion. So I want to thank everyone who helped me, especially with the games that I am admittedly unfamiliar with. I learned a lot from researching this list and the one in the strongest weapons list as well. So if you could leave a like, and remember to, and I'm going to ask this at the end of the video anyway, leave a comment when you're done. I'm sure a lot of people are going to make a case for what they think is their best weapon, so just, again, be nice in the comments. Without further ado and disclaimers, here are the best weapons from each Fire Emblem game. Fire Emblem 1, the Rapier. The Rapier is arguably the best weapon in this game. Available from the very beginning, it's effective against cavalry and armors, and given the density of these unit types, the Rapier is incredibly helpful for as long as you have it. The Armor Slayer is unsurprisingly inferior to the Rapier, and Marth is the only sword unit that can deal effective damage to cavalry as well. Not only that, but you can also buy more Rapiers as the game progresses, so you don't really have to worry about running out of them. Marth is also the best character in the game, adding more to the Rapier's stock. Fire Emblem 2, the Holy Bow. The best weapon in Gaiden is the Holy Bow. This bow, effective against monsters and flying units, has a very high accuracy of 100%, which is really nice in a game with incredibly annoying avoid rates, so bow users, especially Alm when he promotes, are going to enjoy the extended range and high hit rate. This bow is attained at the Fear Shrine, before Fear Mountain, one of the most brutal segments in FE2, and goddamn does the Holy Bow make this bearable. The high accuracy makes it easier for bow knights to hit stuff at range, as accuracy starts to dissipate the longer you start to attack enemies from. The Holy Bow has barely any downside and consistently becomes more useful as time goes on, as late game enemies are more monsters than not. FE3 Book 2, the Silver Lance. Sometimes the best weapon at your disposal doesn't come packed with any bells or whistles. It's just a solid weapon that you can always rely on throughout the entire game. That weapon in Book 2 is none other than the Silver Lance. The lance, sporting a big, hardy 14 might and 90 hit, is incredibly good from the offset, and you get one right off the bat with errands in Chapter 1. Then you can pick up a second one in Chapter 3. Then you can start buying them in armories in Chapter 8. Silver Lances are going to be your strongest weapons throughout the early game of Book 2, and they don't stop being useful throughout the game because 14 might in this game is very high. The thing with weapon usefulness in Book 2 is that different stints of chapters will acquire different weapons to make it easier. Bows are useful early because wyverns are common. Dragon slaying weapons become necessary later on because of dragon dense chapters. But there are fewer more accessible, powerful, and useful weapons even as time goes on than the Silver Lance. FE4 The Brave Sword. What is a highly debatable subject is FE4's best weapon. There's no clear answer. It pretty much falls down to one's preferred way to play Genealogy. FE4 and FE5, as we'll see, has multiple candidates for the best weapon. the Brave Axe in Chapter 1, the Silver Sword in the Prologue, the Light Brand in Chapter 2, and the Brave Sword in Chapter 3, or the Forseti in Chapter 4. But like I said, my pick is the Brave Sword. At 12 might, 3 weight, and 100% hit, the Brave Sword is not only a very strong standalone weapon, it's readily available early on. And while the Brave Axe is available in Chapter 1, the Brave Sword is very flexible as there are much more sword users than axe users. From skilled infantry units to Sigurd and other cavalry, it's simply more helpful to more people than any other weapon. A close contender is the Light Brand, another sword, with a C rank and 12 might and 70 hit, and deals magic damage at 2 range. FE4 has a unique mechanic where after 50 KOs on any weapon, its critical rate jumps up to 50. And if you can achieve that with the Light Brand, which is possible to do for sure, a C rank weapon becomes a massive crit dealing weapon on enemy phase. And that's basically the comparison to make between that and the Brave Sword. It's more available, 1-2 range, but its potential is truly unlocked as the best weapon after 50 kills are met. But this is where my preference just kicks in. I'd rather have the Brave Sword immediately available to contribute to killing enemies right off the bat. 50 kills on a weapon isn't the most hard achievement to get, but it's also not going to drastically screw over your run if you don't unlock the crit chance either. In my opinion, there's no true answer. I'd just rather not commit to 50 kills on one weapon and just use a more efficient KOing weapon immediately. The Brave Sword and other Brave weapons are incredibly good for grinding arena as well, which means easier gold and EXP for units that can use the Brave Sword. Additionally, with the Light Brand, you can't grind 50 kills for that critical boost in the arena either. So, yeah. FE5 Graph Caliber. The Graph Caliber is a 13 might, 3 weight, 40 crit weapon which is effective against flying units. It's an incredibly strong tome, and Asbel, one of the best characters in the game, is the one to wield it. While Graph Caliber is exclusive to one character, this character's availability is incredible. Recruitable as early as Chapter 4X, Asbel and the Graph Caliber immediately make an impact and do not stop being good for the entire game. Graph Caliber is this game's best boss killer. Enemies have usually pretty bad res, and bosses on thrones get extra defense. Graph Caliber shreds through it. And with a base 40 crit, it makes Asbel's potential only go up. The only downside to this weapon is that it only has 40 uses. Also, Asbel's constitution stat, which is 4, makes it so he will never be able to use Graph Caliber to capture enemies, so you can't just throw around this tome all willy-nilly. But when it matters, killing bosses, he's the best. You can send Asbel to a throne room via Warp Staff and get the job done, mostly immediately. There are many really good weapons in FE5, the Brave weapons or the Kingmaker, but Graph Caliber excels over them in terms of killing power and often in terms of availability. FE6 The Killer Lance. In my opinion, the best weapon in this game, in close contention with the Killing Edge, is the Killer Lance. At C rank with 10 might and 30 crit, this weapon is incredibly good on many of the Lance users in this game. While a case can be made about the Killing Edge, as it shares similar traits to its Lance counterpart, but has the benefit of being available decently earlier, Chapter 7 versus Chapter 13, the Killer Lance is incredibly solid of a weapon and continues being useful as the density of enemy Lance users increases throughout the later portions of the game, like in Ilia or Burn. And having the plus 10 accuracy swing against swords is especially helpful given that sword users are usually pretty fast anyway. The stats on the Killer Lance compared to its Steel Lance counterpart is incredible. 10 might, 9 weight, 75 hit, and 30 crit, compared to the honestly garbage Steel Lance, 10 might, 13 weight, 55 hit, and 0 crit. Even the Silver Lance, while stronger by 4 might, has a hit rate of 65, which is still painfully unreliable. The Killer Lance also being 9 constitution is also key, because it lets Milady, a really strong user of this lance and one of the strongest characters in the game, not be weighed down by it at all, keeping her AS intact. FE7 The Hand Axe. This may surprise some who are unfamiliar with the GBA games, but get used to seeing the Hand Axe for a few more entries in this list. At 7 might, 12 weight, and 60 hit, it doesn't seem like it should be the best. I mean, FE6's Hand Axe is the same but with 50 hit. Is that 10% hit improvement that important? Well, yes, but also enemies in FE6 had a luck stat, meaning their avoid was higher. Enemies in FE7 don't, which means the player's chance to hit is much higher. That, the higher hit and weaker enemies in FE7 makes the hand axe much more reliable of a weapon to use. Another reason why hand axes are so good here is because paladins like Marcus can use them. In fact, because axes are just better in FE7 than they are in FE6, all axe-wielding classes benefit from the hand axe's decent might and range a lot more. It's incredibly available and is going to be very good throughout the entire game. It faces barely any competition, as tomahawks are rare and late game, and there are no other throwing axes in the game at all. You can literally just park Marcus, or Oswin, or Sane, or Kent, or Harkin, or Hector in front of a crown of enemies, end turn with a pure water, and just delete the slews of red units coming your way. This is also why the Javelin is insanely good in this game too. Speaking of, FE8, the Javelin. In FE8, paladins, like Seth, can't use axes. So while javelins and hand axes are statistically the exact same in FE7, javelins are the go-to for Seth, Franz, and other paladin lance users, of which there are tons. Enemies in FE8 are even weaker than in FE7. It sounds silly to say that an E-rank weapon that you can get almost immediately could be the best weapon in the game, but again, when factoring availability, consistency, and usefulness over time, the javelin is unmatched. FE9. Hand axes. Taking the title of best weapon for FE9 is the hand axe for a second time. Imagine the FE8 hand axe, but this time you can now forge them. While the base hit for the FE9 hand axe is lowered by 5, forging these weapons makes them even stronger than before. But even at base, there are many axe users that will enjoy this incredibly good 2-range option, just like they did in FE8. FE9 is populated with slower axe unit enemies, as well as generally pretty slow knights and soldiers, not only boosting the axe hit by 10, but also not making you have to deal with particularly dodgy enemies to begin with. Although there are Laguz enemies that come around later, once forging happens, that's when things get wild. It's cheap to turn it from 55 hit to 80 at only 1,020 gold. Even boosting its might from 7 to 12 is nearly 2,000 gold only. It should be noted, however, that in normal mode you can forge hand axes as early as chapter 8. In hard mode though, you need to wait till chapter 18. Which, while certainly longer, won't be that painful of a wait. Titania is not worried over having to wait 10 more chapters to further destroy enemies at range. The hand axe is going to remain consistent until its power is truly unlocked. FE10. Hand axes. For the third time, the hand axe is the best weapon in this game. And it's stronger in this game too. D rank, 9 might, and 70 hit, and 1-2 range is very important in Radiant Dawn, as ranged enemies populate these maps. Soldiers with javelins, sword users with wind edges, axe users with hand axes, mages, and archers that can of course attack in range. The thing is, hand axes outclass even these ranged options, boasting more might and accuracy than wind edges, javelins, and even most tomes until the late game. And hard mode completely removes the weapon triangle altogether, making the previous disadvantages obsolete and making them even more of the best choice for axe users specifically. Not only that, but axe users in Radiant Dawn have skill. Nolan, Titania, Boyd, Jill, and the legendary god Har will be reliably killing enemies with this. And Har will, of course, delete everything he comes across. And once those better weapons become more accessible down the line, so does the Forge, starting in chapter 3-8. Hand axes go from 9 to 14 might and from 70 to 95 hit. You can build crit rates higher in this game too. But this is where the hand axes our best era of Fire Emblem ends. FE11. The Wingspear. What is going to be your best weapon consistently is the Wingspear, Sita's exclusive lance. 8 might, 90 hit, 4 weight, and 10 crit, it is immediately forgeable and is most importantly effective versus cavalry and armored units. This effectiveness, alongside the relatively cheap cost to increase might combined with the density of cavalry and armor enemies and bosses, makes the Wingspear immensely strong of a weapon throughout the entire game. It's made even more valuable on Shida, available immediately, and is a flyer. In some ways, it's like the Rapier 2.0. FE12. Forged Steel Bows. Taking the title of the best weapon in FE12 is the Forged Steel Bow. At D rank, 8 might, and 80 hit. While at first seemingly a strange choice to some that a bow would be here, they are no doubt one of, if not the most useful and needed weapons to survive the harder difficulty modes. Comically referred to as Porthia, the Forged Steel Bow will see much use in order to deal with FE12's early game Draco Knights. It will continue being useful even afterwards. While the Forged Iron Bow does the same thing, but is slightly more accurate at base in exchange for weaker might and availability, allowing for more units to use it early on, and unlike specialized weapons like the Wyrmslayer and the Dragon Pike, which are unreliable if they're used to fight normal enemies, the Forged Steel Bow remains consistent and is ranged. Nosferatu is very strong, but is not nearly as available as the Steel Bow. For some, it's going to be hard to determine between the Forged Iron Bow and the Forged Steel Bow. But either way, they're both insanely good and basically needed to survive the hardest difficulties in the game. In my opinion, after dealing with wyverns at higher difficulties, the more might, the better for me. FE13 Nosferatu. The best weapon in Awakening is Nosferatu, and nothing really comes close. Available in Chapter 13 from a shop, the healing component of Nosferatu, combined with the ability to stack skills and abuse the game's pair-up feature, alongside the fact that this game has no weight factor whatsoever, makes Nosferatu insanely broken because you can stack crit rate and pair-up bonuses and damage super high every time you take damage. You heal it right back. Anyone who has ever used Nosferatu in combination with what I just said will know that this weapon is so broken in a game that is very, very easy to break already. FE14 The Raijinto. There are several weapons that could be called best in Fates. You could argue Siegfried. You could also argue Iron Daggers and Shuriken when they're forged. In Fates, it's challenging to determine the best weapon because some are exclusive to their route. But when considering how strong certain weapons are relative to the route they are in, and what types of common enemies there are in that route, I think the Raijinto is the best overall weapon in Fates. 11 might, 80 hit, and 5 crit, and range as well as offering +3 strength as a passive bonus to just having it in the inventory, and also giving it +10 void makes this weapon stand out in more ways than one. First of all, nearly all ranged weapons have some kind of drawback to balance it, whether it's not being able to follow up, critical hit, or activate skills, or debuffs after combat. Raijinto does not have that limitation. 11 might for a katana also makes it among the strongest of that type. Additionally, the +3 strength as a passive just for being in the inventory gives you no reason to never not have it in the inventory ever. Even if reclassed to a non-sword using physical unit, he's getting that +3 strength anyway. Its placement is also validated by Birthright being loaded with enemies for Ryoma to just end turn on. Compared to Xander's Siegfried, he'll have a harder time dealing with Conquest's enemy variety, and also loses the availability contest as Xander arrives 2 chapters later than Ryoma does in Birthright. Even though Ryoma himself is obviously insanely strong, the Raijinto's stats hold up on their own. In my opinion, it's the most solid and consistent weapon in all of Fates. You should never not use it in some capacity. FE15 The Killer Bow. The best weapon in this game is the Killer Bow, coming in at 4 might, 4 weight, 90 hit, 20 crit, and 1-3 range, with max forges giving it 9 might, 2 weight, 90 hit, and 30 crit. This weapon outclasses all weapons in the game in terms of performance for one simple reason: Hunter's Volley. The combat art unlocked with this weapon. This combat art is incredible, adding 1 might, 15 hit, 10 crit, and having a brave effect at the cost of just 8 HP. The user is safely able to snipe from afar with a crit rate of 40 at base when the bow is fully forged. First of all, the 15 hit bonus is fantastic as enemies are annoying to hit. Second, the added critical helps ensure that Hunter's Volley is one of the most consistent weapons to land criticals in this game. And third, archers are generally slow, but now they can attack twice. Not to mention, users of Hunter's Volley can safely attack without fear of retaliation, as the only usual enemies that can counter are just other archers at 3 range. Add on to that Bow Knights get 2 more range, and suddenly you have a 5 range bomb, which at this point easily has over 50% critical hit. A full ranged Hunter's Volley, even with Alm, just makes the enemies utterly helpless as critical hits rain down on them. They do not have the range or bulk to counter or survive, unless we're talking about dragons, in which case Hunter's Volley will become one of, if not the safest option to whittle down their HP. It's so oppressive to enemies that the maps essentially lower in size as your range and mobility improves as the game goes on. There's nothing else this strong and this early to use in Shadows of Valentia. Fire Emblem 3 Houses. The Iron Bow Plus. The best weapon in Fire Emblem Three Houses, a game with legendary weapons with combat arts that defy tradition, is the good old Iron Bow Plus. Surprised? Well, if you've played Maddening, you shouldn't be. If you've been starting to pick up on the trend with the best weapons of the game, it is more often the Journeyman's weapon, the early and mid-game wonder that gets the job done. The Iron Bow Plus has a modest 7 might, 95 hit, and 5 weight, and it's fantastic for similar reason for why the forged bows of FE12 are. Their stock rises as the game's difficulty increases. The Iron Bow Plus is a reliable chipping damaging tool, and at D rank bows unlocks the amazingly useful curved shot. When used, it increases the user's might by 1, hit by a huge 30%, and range by a very important 1 space. Maddening mode is a very player phase oriented difficulty that will more often than not punish the player for trying to end turn and tank enemies, especially in the early game, as you are usually being doubled and are taking a lot of damage and can't hit things reliably without combat arts to begin with. You just don't have the tools in the form of weapons and abilities to manage the enemies this early this time around. But you do have D-rank combat arts, and not being hit back from outranging foes makes iron bows and the curve shot invaluable to a run. Nearly every unit on your team will benefit from this 2-range option, even just being able to outrange enemies. What's more is that even after the early game, iron bows will remain helpful as reliable and cheap weapons to manage. There are other candidates for the best weapon, certainly. Training gauntlets assist in doubling with their brave effect. Forged maces have an incredible 90% hit chance over their unforged 70% hit base stat. And steel axe pluses are especially reliable for their might combined with the smash combat art to get kills, as well as steel lances with the Tempest lance combat art. The brave axe, available via forging of a steel axe, can be attained as early as chapter 8 alongside B+ professor level, which when further forged will be an invaluable asset for the rest of the game. But in my opinion, nothing is as consistent, reliable, and safe as the Iron Bow Plus with that 3-range curved shot. It won't look like much, but it's honest work, and it gets the job done. Unscripted Ghast here. I just want to say thank you so much for watching this video. This script took different forms, as it originally was going to include the strongest weapons in each game too, but that would make this list essentially twice as big, and I thought it would just end up muddling the whole point of the video anyway. Best weapons and strongest weapons look very, very different, and it will be really cool to explore the most raw, strongest weapons in the game. Anyways, if you guys enjoyed this video, please let me know by leaving a like down below and commenting your thoughts on any one of these weapons, or if you have a weapon in particular that you want to highlight for the best in your favorite game or a game that you want to talk about. I also want to thank my patrons. They're always so helpful to me. They allow me to help pay my rent and other bills, and I'm really not sure if I could be doing YouTube full-time without their help. And if you want to join my Patreon community, you can join for as little as $4 a month. I love to interact with the members of my Patreon as well. It's always a good vibes place, really fun community, and yeah, we'd love to have you. And you'd be helping me too, which is awesome. Lastly, I'm going to be a YouTuber again and say, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. The channel is so close to 90,000 subscribers, and I want to do something kind of fun for 90K. So if you haven't subscribed yet, but you do like my scripted videos, and they're showing up in your recommended feed anyway, just do me a favor and click subscribe. It's free. Anyways, guys, that'll do it for me. Hopefully you have a good rest of your weekend. I don't know when this video is coming out, but if it's tomorrow, as in the 12th, then have a good weekend. Deuces.